Yeah, let's get Mary on. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, Chris.
So, welcome to the show, Containing COVID. Quickly, GHRA. People want to know, assess the situation. What's going on with the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association?
Well, thanks for having me.
We're definitely glad you came on. So, yeah, if you could just tell us where GHRA is at with this order that came out. We do have Nestor here too.
Hi, Mary. How you doing? So how are the properties doing right now? Are they all still operating at this point?
Majority are, yes, as most would understand that we still have guests, right, in-house. Some properties are as low as 8% up to almost 50% still. We still have had travelers coming through this last week. So through next week, we're expecting numbers to go a little bit below 30%, and then the week after, I'm hearing arrivals are down to about 20%, down to zero.
Yeah.
So as cancellations and airlines continue to make changes, those numbers will fluctuate. And so I think that the hotels are already anticipating a severe drop in arrivals from 0 to maybe 20%. And so what we're doing is we've been working with some of the hotels to possibly consolidate some of their guests to properties where they can service all of them. And then for the last 2 weeks, GHRA has been working with the government of Guam to identify facilities, not just hotels, but facilities in general, that can serve as mass quarantine for any of the asymptomatic travelers, both resident and non-resident. Remember, we have two protocols. One in particular for Manila, because that's where all our COVID cases have been realized, as travelers who are residents from Guam traveling to and from Manila. So those facilities are serving as involuntary quarantine locations where they were automatically taken there. And then we have any of the non-resident travelers who already had pre-booked plans to get to Guam and they cleared public health. They are within properties, but they are on quarantine floors. Regardless, though, wherever they're at, if it's a hotel or a quarantine facility, please know GHRA has worked closely with Guam Police Department, Guam Fire Department, Public Health, and Homeland Security, and even the front office at the government of Guam with the executive branch to ensure that we have proper government personnel there to really coordinate the services. The hotels are only really providing back-at-the-house operations, so really helping with room access and giving that to public health, not so much the guest or the traveler. And so they're really providing back-at-the-house, coordinating the rooms, any linens, housekeeping, room service for food delivery, but all items should be delivered through the security of Government of Guam and Public Health. So we have GPD. We haven't activated the guard yet, but we have GPD and fire working together with Public Health to man those hotels.
Okay. What can you tell us about F&B operations as a result of the governor's executive order? Of course, there's no sit-in service, but are the hotels prepared at this point to do takeout, or is that not something that they're interested in doing at this point?
I think the hotels at this point are focusing on the in-house guests and providing in-room delivery when required. But as far as restaurants, I know that they have actively been looking how to continue business and provide services to the community in general at large. And so a lot of businesses have really come out and provided new types of services like takeout or delivery services.
Okay, what can you tell us about layoffs given the huge drop in occupancy?
Well, just one more thing to add. Drive-thrus are also allowable. I know initially it was said no, but drive-thrus will be allowable together with takeout or delivery service. And then also catering, because we have to provide mass catering to certain places with quarantine, right? So what was your other question? Sorry, Nestor.
Layoffs. What's been the impact of the drop in occupancy on employment?
Well, already we started the discussions about 2 weeks ago with the governor and then also with Department of Labor, knowing that once the numbers drop below 30%, which was the expected number when she released her economic measures through Team Guam, it was very important that we start activating certain programs in anticipation of layoffs, despite the social isolation executive order she released yesterday. So we've already been working with Department of Labor. Unfortunately, they are closed at this time, but we have been working with communications with the director, Dave De La Sola, to make sure that we are still communicating programs like the dislocated worker that is federally funded with the U.S. Department of Labor. Businesses have to go through certain procedures in order to go through the process with them so that they can put the paperwork together in order for their employees to become eligible for that program for retraining and rehiring with other businesses or other trades or industries. So we have the dislocated worker program. I know that there are different campaigns or bills that have recently been passed with regards to possible covering of sick leave if you're at home, but also the $1,000 per person. Right now, I've asked Department of Labor to research that on what the process is so we can educate our private sector members and also the public on how they can attain those benefits and submit their claims. It's almost like during a typhoon when we have FEMA out and they get those checks to sustain themselves. I believe the process will be similar to that, where individuals who are U.S. citizens can come in and receive those benefits. But we need to coordinate services, and so they're currently researching that of who's eligible and what's the process going to be like for the administrative procedure.
So for more information, do you recommend that employees check in with their respective HR departments?
Yes, but we also need the cooperation of the businesses because GHRA is sending this information out, but unless you come to us and notify us that you are looking for support services for when you're looking at any reduction in force, layoffs, or furloughs, we need to know that so we can activate it. We are focusing, of course, right now with some of the larger entities because they've already notified us. And so those are hotels. I think that the larger retailers right now, they are just temporarily suspending services, but they are not going to be cutting back at this time. I think that a lot of people are just allowing people to take sick leave and then personal leave first. And that is our recommendation so that we don't have a mass layoff, is exhaust as much of the sick leave and then the personal leave. And then we will get the information out once we hear from Department of Labor because the president had put together that bill where everybody will get 2 weeks of sick leave at least.
Yeah.
So that's very important that we notify the private sector. So that way we can kind of push the timeline of when they activate letting people go. Because as much as we can save a layoff, the better. But we understand that they can't continue operations at the same time. And so they have to right-size operations and really think about the total cost of doing business during a crisis like this and when they anticipate to reopen doors. So it might be a temporary situation, but that's why we want the assistance of Guam Department of Labor together with GHRA, because in order for certain people to get benefits or get into a program, you have to qualify by notifying employees and giving them enough time frame. You can't just let them go and call it, a layoff like that. You have to give certain notifications, and there are time requirements for that, like 60 days. And then you have to offer packages, right, or at least benefits. So we need to ensure that we educate the employers on how to do this if their employees are going to benefit from programs.
Right. And hopefully it will be sooner rather than later. But when this is all over, what about the return to work process? Are they automatically rehired, or do they need to automatically get their job back, or do they need to go through a rehiring process?
Well, if the company is going through the dislocated worker program or the employee is going through it, there is a process of the rehire. Whether they want to retrain and go through the program and they have to cross-train and go into new trades, If they just rehire, they may not be eligible for certain things. So it's very, there are a lot of details in it. And so, Nestor, I'll forward you the links to the website on the U.S. Department of Labor. It's actually through the Workforce Investment Opportunities Act, which is a federal fund that Guam Department of Labor has been receiving for decades. So I sit together with James Martinez and other members of the business community, and Maria Connolly is chair. She was supposed to meet with our membership this last Thursday, but of course we had to cancel meetings. So Maria has really reached out, wanting to make sure that we educate businesses on the proper protocols to qualify and to have their employees eligible for these programs.
Yeah, that's
because if you rehire them, there's actual benefits to the employers as well for rehiring and retraining people.
Mary, I was just wondering if you have had any conversation, any dialogue, any contact with anybody in the government of Guam or the administration indicating that this shelter-in-place order, this government-wide shutdown is going to last beyond March 30th?
It all depends on the COVID cases. So its executive order only goes through March 30th because it's only allowable for 30 days. So if our COVID cases keep adding, then you're supposed to add another 14 days to that. So she may very well extend it past March 30th if we continue to get positive cases, because we have to allow enough time for medical personnel to do the public health to do the trace back, and for medical personnel to do treatment. And so as long as we have active cases, then it's going to be an additional 14 days from that day. And so she may very well need to extend that out.
Okay. We have that a really big property that is supposed to open, I believe, next month, the Subaki Tower. I imagine that might have to be pushed back.
Well, we just got clarification yesterday. One of the essential businesses that will be allowable is general construction. I know that the initial statement or executive order had listed construction only for public housing and public utilities and public works, but we did get clarification that construction for general industry as well as military will be allowable.
We got a question from Facebook, Grant, for the fact that we are
Can I just add to that real quick, though?
Sure.
I believe, though, they're still enforcing the social distancing and no more than 50 at a time. So even though construction projects are on, they still have to, similar to like even in the hotels or any place, that you still have to keep under 50 at a time, and then with the requirement of 6 feet for the social distancing.
Okay. The question was, we are in a global pandemic now. For those that are still working or continuing business operations, should we be getting hazard pay for this?
That is really, I think that's really more of an insurance type of question, and I don't think that Guam has hazard pay except for those in the military possibly, or even in certain industries.
Well, I think you just gave about 10 senators their next bill idea.
Well, there's a lot of things to be considered. I think that even on the federal side, with Congress, they're considering a lot of other options, right? Because I heard just yesterday there are certain industries that are going to be completely shut down because of tourism. So I know that there is a tourism stimulus economic package being considered. And then now with regards to the employees, if they're going to have a particular package, because they're all dependent on that type of industry. And so it affects everybody from airlines to servers to retail. Anyone in the service industry is more greatly affected because we're basically cutting off travel. And so I know that Congress is considering a tourism stimulus package for businesses, but also looking at an employee package on the individual basis. So I think it's important that anyone at the legislature who are looking at these kinds of things, that we kind of not do it in a vacuum and inundate our community with additional laws that might already could be being considered at the federal level, or programs that already exist. For example, on the unemployment, I think it's important to coordinate together with Guam Department of Labor on that, because we already have programs that serve, and other social welfare programs between what public health provides and what Guam Department of Labor provides, I don't think that we necessarily need an unemployment bill because we already have programs available for those who are unemployed.
That's the measure that the Vice Speaker has, I guess, put out there, the
Right.
local unemployment. What have you read about the tourism economic stimulus and the stimulus for the employees? Do you have any more details on that?
No, I can get that to you as well. I know that it's been in discussion, and so I just saw that on the national news last night, and so I forwarded that already to Guam Department of Labor's Director, Dave De La Sola, to research.
Mary, so are you in dialogue communication with Dave De La Sola? Because I know they were deemed a non-essential agency, and I've been trying to reach out to him because we're getting a lot of calls, exactly about displaced workers.
Yep.
We're not really getting anything from him, so I'm just curious. To your, as far as you're concerned, is Department of Labor doing what they need to be doing right now to help displaced workers and those affected by COVID-19 economically?
Well, GHRA is a private non-government organization, so that is why we always provide services during times of emergency where we represent private sector and the industry employees.
Sure.
So at any time, we're always active. And so when the government of Guam, it's at their discretion with which agencies they consider essential, but that still doesn't prevent me from contacting the right individuals.
Right.
So Dave De La Sola has been in communication with me regarding these programs because it is a directive actually from the governor when we had the economic measures meeting. She felt that that was important so we could at least bridge with each other and provide a service to private sector to ensure that we are helping to promote the programs and educate businesses on what is available. As far as coordination of services at this time, all we're doing is coordinating via phone or email, but my staff, I have one dedicated person who is actually reaching out to private sector to make sure they know of the programs. So when Department of Labor reopens, then we have a go team to go out to the businesses and start getting them signed up. But we are encouraging that they not again consider layoffs. They exhaust all sick leave first and personal leave because they may be allowable to submit for 2 weeks anyway through this federal program.
Right.
But I've looked at the details for that, and it's really for people who had to be quarantined at home. So there might be a medical form that will be required that if you had sought medical treatment, you would qualify. So most companies have sick leave policies. So even my staff, I've said, our sick leave policy is in our employer handbook. It's anything sick over 3 days, you have to get a medical leave form, right? So, but right now it's challenging since some clinics aren't operational because they're serving the overflow of the hospital.
Right.
And so how do we address that? But with regards to Department of Labor, I know that I've been in contact with them only because I coordinate services.
Right.
But I think for overall general inquiries, they're probably they won't be operational until the governor allows them to.
That's something I disagree with. I think there's a lot of workers out here who have been affected, who are going to be affected, who are probably experiencing a lot of anxiety. And I just texted Dave and said, "Hey, you got to get some info out here for these people, man."
Yeah, so that's why we've been sharing it in all our messaging. Is if you look at even some of our previous GHRA messages, we have talked about, like, Maria was supposed to come out and speak to everybody. So it's not just Dave, there's a chairperson for the board, and the board is the Workforce Investment Opportunities Act. And so that's where the funding comes from, and the decisions are made too. It's through that board.
Maria, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned employers use personal leave as an option. I'm friends with a manager that was with a group of restaurants, and they met with their employees yesterday, and that's what they said. They said, "Hey, first, you guys are on vacation. You know what I mean? We're going to use that personal leave." So
yes.
There are definitely ways they could be creative.
I don't want to say which, but they've been very generous to their employees, and they're considering closure, and they've already agreed to not tap into sick leave and personal leave. They're just covering 2 weeks of leave already.
Mary, do you imagine that some businesses may be forced to close their doors for good as a result of this?
I've been notified. I don't know about for good, but I have already been notified about closures, including hotels. So we're valid. We're double checking whether or not it's permanent closure. I know that one is looking at a permanent closure, which is a
Which
smaller
one?
hotel. I can't release that right now because
Okay.
we're still validating it. But I know that there are general interests out there that when the number drops down to below even 10, right, to 0, then they will consider temporarily suspending services until they can be operational again. Because we all have to remember it's a full facility where they may house several hundred employees, but it's also power, water, cleaning services, like all kinds of costs that are included in the operations of a large facility. And again, not just hotels, there's restaurants and retail outlets. A lot of stores are closing especially as of today, but some have already chosen to close. So this is a really wide-ranging, very wide and deep kind of a initiative for the social isolation. I think it's still the right thing to do for the community, but at the same time, it'll have huge ramifications for a very long time.
What's your sense of the mood of the hotel and restaurant operators? Are they fairly optimistic of a rebound eventually?
I think this is very challenging because first and foremost, I don't think anybody knows how quick the rest of the world will rebound. I think that everybody is approaching this differently, which is what's challenging. Singapore is a great example of how they've approached it, but every government is different. And so it comes down to how soon you can contain it. The earliest you can contain it, the better for everybody in your own market. But I think that the governor has, although she can't close the airport, she has made it as restrictive as possible, where airlines are already choosing to change out their schedules or just not fly to Guam because it's so restrictive and it's putting tourists in a mandatory quarantine, right? So I think that part has been handled as far as she can handle it without closing. But how we contain it is number one, and then also how we choose to communicate to our key market segments, and that's where GDB and GHRA are extremely significant in this, is how do we reopen our, not just ports of entry, but our relationships.
Right.
And so everybody is watching how we're managing this, and that's why it's very challenging. It has been extremely challenging on the tourism side because of the way, we have been handling mandatory quarantine and protocols, because the markets are looking at how we handle it.
Yeah.
And so I think that Japan and Korea, for the most part, are key market segments. Everybody is always going to have, good and bad things to say, but it's about maintaining the relationship and making sure they understand that we're doing what's right for Guam, but how can we move forward and ensure that we maintain those relationships when we do reopen. Then it's not back to business, back to usual business, but at least how do we gain the confidence in those markets so that we can start adding some positive numbers.
Yeah, I imagine the after-crisis marketing will be very, very important, because there will be pent-up demand. People will want to travel once they feel reassured.
I'm just going to want to eat out and sit in a dining room.
So yeah.
Yeah, but I will tell you, markets look at how places responded, right? Destinations respond. And so I know that GVB, we have a coronavirus stakeholder group, and I know that we already have our recovery plans, but that's still on hold because we're not there and it's still being reviewed. But GVB, we've been through this so many times before with different kinds of, not just pandemics, but just any kind of situation affecting our destination. And so just know that the team has really been working hard to ensure that we are ready to activate when we need to, just like what the hotels and restaurants do. And it's not just GVB who promotes the market. Hotels and airlines have a huge responsibility and probably even larger budget than what GVB has when it comes to marketing and promoting our island as a destination. So there needs to be a consolidated and coordinated, unified effort when it comes to promoting Guam between the airlines, the hotels, the transportation, travel agents, Counselor Corps, and GVB. And so that needs to be our main focus once we are getting everybody on containment. Our main focus is how do we really start having those conversations on how we've approached the whole situation, and then how do we move on from there so we could really educate our markets about how we've been performing.
Hi, Mary. It's Sabrina. I have a question. You were talking about promoting the island and all of that, but I was just curious if GHRA was involved in that promotion that went out by the governor and the lieutenant governor, promoting visitors to still come to Guam during this coronavirus outbreak.
No, GBB has the full responsibility of the marketing and promotions of Guam.
What's your response though, to that?
Our mission is to advocate with government entities for compliance and regulatory, but also to train, educate, and to provide assistance to our businesses, our stakeholders, especially the employees. So that's why training and education is extremely important for us for workforce development. And so that's the core of our mission, is really more the internal part of it and the operations of what's going on between businesses and with employees in the industry. GBB is responsible for the marketing and promotions as well.
Was GHRA involved with in helping come up with this mandatory quarantine protocols?
We only were involved at the time when it was identified that they were going to go with it. And then what GHRA has been actively doing is working on the frequently asked questions whenever we field questions, and working with GBB on that. And then also identifying some of the operations of how it's going to be implemented. So all of the protocols, we had stakeholder meetings with hotels, they had meetings with airlines, we also had meetings with all of our agents, counselor corps. So it's based on how we implement it. Once the governor identifies what her and her cabinet members and her key agencies want to do, then we look to implement. I've only been giving advisement on really with tourism specific issues and on implementation of plans.
Okay, Mary, we definitely appreciate your time. Wow, you got a lot of information out, so valuable, and thank you again.
Thanks, Mary.
No,
Thanks,
thank
Mary.
you for including us.
Of course, Mary.
Okay, be safe.
Be
Okay,
safe.
you too. Wash your hands.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I don't. I'm just doing my part.
That's right.
Hey, we're gonna take a break. 9:05 coming up. The Crayon Lady.